Hi everyone, we're going to continue with Lassie Come Home. This is the chapter Lassie Comes Over the Border, and she had just swam through the Tweed River, which separates Scotland from England, and she didn't know that she was in England, but she had had quite a journey up into this point, and now she just came out of that river, and here comes that next part, and there are those three dots, which means there's a change in setting. The room was small and humble. In a chair beside a table where the lamp glowed, Daniel Fadden sat, reading slowly from the newspaper. Near the coal fire on the hearth, his wife sat in a rocking chair, knitting. She teetered endlessly back and forth as her fingers flashed over the wool and needles, so that the movements all seemed related. The one rock of the chair, 3 stitches of the needles. They were both old people, and it seemed that they had been so long together in life that there was no longer any need to talk. They were contented just to be, sure in the knowledge that the other was near. Do you have anyone in your family or friend who's like that? You can be just content with each other, not talking, just be happy to know that you're by each other. Finally, the man pushed his steel-rimmed spectacles back on his forehead and looked at the hearth. "We'll do it a bit more coal on the fire," he said. His wife nodded as she rocked, and her lips went through the noiseless form of counting. She was turning a heel in her knitting and wanted to keep to sure count. The man rose slowly. Taking the scuttle, he went to the sink. In the cupboard beneath was the coal bin. With a little shovel, he slowly scooped some out. "And we're nearly out," he said. His wife looked over. Mentally, both of them began to count the cost of more coal. How quickly they had used the last hundredweight. Their lives were deeply concerned with these things. Expenses ran very close. All they had was a small pension that the government gave them, and it paid for their son who had been killed in France. I'm going to read that sentence again. All they had was a small pension that the government paid for their son who had been killed in France. Then each of them drew the old age pension of 10 shillings a week, given by the state. This was no wealth, but they husbanded it carefully and owed no man. Now, husbanded is not a word we use. Husband would be a verb in that case, and that's not something that we use very often. And I don't know if it's used still that way in England. But I want you to think about what that word means, and then we'll check in a little bit to confirm your meaning of the word husbanded it. So I'm going to read that sentence again. This was no wealth, but they husbanded it carefully and owed no man. The tiny cottage far out on the highway away from town was a cheap place to live. In the little plot of land about it, Fadden grew a stock of vegetables. He had a flock of chickens, several ducks, and a goose fattening for Christmas. This last was their largest and most lasting joke. 6 years before, Fadden had traded a dozen early hen eggs for one tiny gosling. Carefully he had raised it, boasting about what a fine plump bird it would be by Christmas time. It had become just that, marvelous and plump. And a few days before the holiday of holidays, Fadden had taken his hatchet, and he sat indoors for a long time regarding it. And finally his wife, understanding, had looked up patiently. "Don," she said, "I just don't think I'd favor goose this year. If you did a chicken instead, and—" "Aye, Dally," Fadden had said, "it would be a terrible waste, one big goose for just the 2 of us. Now a chicken would be just right." And so the goose was spared. Each year after that it was dutifully fattened up for Christmas. "This year it goes," Fadden would always announce, "fattening a goose all year just to strut and waddle around like he's king of everything. This year he goes." And always the goose lived. Mrs. Fadden always knew it would. And when Fadden announced belligerently that it was headed for the Yule oven, Yule is a word for Christmas time, when it was headed for the Yule oven, she would say dutifully, "Aye, Dan." And when he hemmed and hawed at the last minute and announced that a goose was too much for the both of them, she would say, "Aye, Dan," and privately she often said to herself that the goose would be living long after. As she put it, the 2 of them were deep under the ground and at rest. So what does that tell you about them, the Faddens? It tells me that they're animal lovers and that they have a heart for animals, and I think they kept that goose as their pet. But she would not have it otherwise. In fact, if Dan had ever gone through with his firmly announced intentions, she would have felt the world was dropping out from under her. Of course, it costs a lot to feed up a great hungry goose, but one could save other ways. A penny here, a penny there. One could always buy carefully and save carefully, nursing the copper coins along. So I'm going to ask you again, if you think the word husbanded meant that they took care of their money and saved it and bought things wisely, then yes, I think you're right. I think that's what husbanded meant. So their life went with dignity and great content, but always with the thought of precious pennies, as it was this evening when they both reckoned up the amount of coal and how long it had lasted. "I never mind any mending the fire, Dan," she said. "Just bed it up with the ashes, and we'll be away to bed. We stay up too late anyhow." "Sit ye there a while," Daniel said, for he knew Dally dearly loved to rock and knit before the hearth for a couple of hours in the evening. "It's early yet. I'll put just a little on. From heaven knows it's chilly enough tonight. Nasty cold east rain." Dolly nodded. As she rocked, she listened to the wind howling at the east of the low house and the shuddering of the rain on the shutters. "Oh, it'll be coming for autumn soon, Dan." "Aye, that it will. This is the first of them Easters. And cold. Blow right through a man's body to his bones. I'd hate to be out in it for long."